Well, good day, fine people, and welcome to the Large Impact podcast series, where we talk to people who go out on a daily basis and do their best to make a large impact. And today I have the honor and privilege of visiting with a family member. Yay, I don't know if it's second cousin or first cousin once removed, don't know, but
Me neither.
yeah, right, something.
Something like that.
Mary Haverstick. And she, you are quite accomplished. I was reading your bio, which we will post with the, when we launch your interview.
Mhm.
And it just talks about, I'm just going to go through real quick, just a couple things that you've done. First you were into filmmaking, and, you've had some really stellar accomplishments, with Home, right? And that was with Marcia Harden. And you've had an opportunity to work with Liam Neeson and Alan Alda. And so when you got into making these and writing, even, didn't you write Home as well?
Wrote the movies. Yes, and
So you
directed
write them and direct them and everything. So what was it like kind of that got you started in wanting to do that?
in wanting to do films. Well, I always was first of all, it's great to be with you on this show. I always was, you go back to your childhood interests. I think a lot of us do eventually think of, well, what if you get out of school and you've studied things and then you think, what is it I really love doing? And I've always loved doing. And imagery was always something I was drawn to. Photography. It's kind of always the best photographer in the family. So, I wound up shooting all the family events, and I do that even on video. And I just love doing that, and I was good at it. And of course, you like doing something you're good at, and then you kind of get away from it for a number of years. So yeah, as I got out of college, I circled back to it, and by then was kind of really enjoying watching movies and exploring where movies can take you, places that you've never been. I enjoyed vintage films, even though I was in college in the 80s, which will of course date me, but I was real interested in the movies from my mom's era, the 40s, and I learned so much about the 40s through watching cinema, the golden agers and the great actresses of old. So I was drawn to it for some of those reasons early on. But back then there wasn't a really great film school opportunity. So there weren't very many of them like today. There's a zillion and there are a lot of ways to go. But back then it was very mysterious how movies got made. And independent film was just starting to really blossom. And so I was on the cusp of that, an early female filmmaker that was making films back when you were scrounging to put things together, and you were teaching your team and yourself how to make those films. And that's really how I started out. And then ultimately, like you mentioned, it grew into still being independent and still getting my own financing together and everything, but then getting the clout where I could cast a movie star in my film that I wrote and bring her to my hometown to film a story close to my heart. That had taken me a very long time. So I've summarized that in a few paragraphs where in fact that was like a life's work to get to that point.
Right.
But that's sort of a dream, I think, for any filmmaker, to be able to write the story that you want to write and then cast the type of level actress that you want or actor that you want to cast and work with people of that level. And so, I was at that point in my life when I think we're going to probably talk about the big curveball that hit me, where I got in a different kind of project came into my life. And then I kind of dropped my career path for an unknown quantity to pursue a different story.
Yes. And incredible. And, and I was just thinking, I understand wanting to get to the level where you can involve people who are top in their industry, and have them want to be involved. And, how thrilling that must have been and continues to be, right? This is your bevy now, those are your people now. So like how exciting that must be. And you even had one of your films in the Cannes Film Festival, right?
Not the Cannes Film Festival. I was over there, I believe, in the market. I've been, one of the biggest festivals I've been at is actually a prestigious film festival in Canada called the Montreal Film Festival. That was the one where we debuted Home, and Home was featured there. We had a, pretty big reception there with some great reviews that, said Marcia Gay's performance was, Oscar worthy. I mean, we really came out guns blazing in that one. The bottom line, though, is that when you do smaller films that aren't about huge national issues, just about changes of heart in one woman's life, sometimes those films, and especially in the era of Cape Crusaders on screen and the sequels and the giant, production numbers, little films can get lost in the shuffle. So it's hard to break out with films like that into what I would call the national consciousness, or basically creating a big hit. I've never been jonesing for that. You always want your movies to be seen more, but I've never wanted to do movies that I wanted to do personal films that meant something to me, not films for the sake of a commercial project. If you love comic books, then you should do a comic book superhero movie. But if you love stories about people and, people you may know in your community, right? Then, and they're championing things like you've done or others, sometimes those stories struggle to see the light of day or become, they don't necessarily become the overnight sensations, especially in this current marketplace. So those are ones you have to take forward because you believe in it and because that's your calling, so to speak. So I've always championed, the smaller stories or stories that were very personal to me or ones that I really, really resonated to. After all, like a film takes 3 years of your life. So you better believe in it because you're going to be doing it for quite some time.
Wow. Yeah. And so you were talking about, huge national issues and the national consciousness. And I just want real quick, since COVID, it was a game changer for the entire world.
Everybody.
And so and you're talking about smaller pictures, like more independent films. I've here, working with our the movie theater that we've worked with to do our sensory friendly movies the last 10 years, there's a lot of challenges with these big blockbuster things, and
right.
Nobody's quite sure of what's going to happen when, which is true of anybody in any business right now as we try and recover from
exactly
whatever it was. So do you think that there's more opportunity for the independent filmmakers just because it's or is it more of a challenge because everybody's trying to get a piece of everybody's attention?
I always like that phrase that said in every crisis there is an opportunity, right? So if there's a crisis like COVID, it's really bad and it's really rough, but it also presents its opportunities. So we saw the theaters shutting down for the periods of time that they did, and they've had trouble bouncing back. But we've also seen the uptick in streaming, right? So there's opportunities there. It's a mixed blessing. And so I think as an artist or business person, you have to be nimble and go where you see that you've gotten your lane or your path. So that's a tough one. I wouldn't want to answer that one way or the other, but I do think, though, that I will say this. In my course of my career, I have seen the trend line change from when there used to be so many stories about, just think how many films there are about real people, real person, not somebody who was fighting a war in the 1400s or Game of Thrones, or not somebody who, or a superhero or some crazy sci-fi thing, but just a person like what you do, what I do, what our neighbors do. How many of those films do we see anymore? And those are fewer. Way fewer. And that to me is a concern, because who are we holding up as our heroes or our people to look up to? Don't we have people in our own communities that we can look up to? Do we have to always dress them in a cape or give them superpowers to have them be worthy of having 14 screens at the local Cineplex? I say we have some other heroes too worthy of some screen time.
I love that. I do. For sure, because there's not enough. And so who is your hero or heroes, since we're talking about heroes?
It's hard to say.
I would be, of course.
Of course. President Company. That's a great question. And I think I have a handful. I mean, I've been very immersed in the in the Kennedy assassination story, which we'll probably talk about. The book is, has to do with that, stumbled into. So I've looked at that era and I've looked at who are the heroes, and all politics aside, I think President Kennedy, whether Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter, but he was championing a few things that turned out to be, good for society in the sense of, equal rights. He was concerned about some war, activists, seeing so many, violent breakouts currently in the world. And he was trying to trend line towards some of those things. So I'd say there was some, I wouldn't use the word hero for him because he is a political figure, but I've admired some of the things he said. And I especially admire his crusade for space. You know, he really wanted to get us to the moon. He took that on. And when I hear his words, I get chills when I think of him launching that moon mission. And I have the speech where he proclaimed we'll get there by the end of this decade. Saying that in the early 60s when we weren't doing well with our rockets and the Russians were, and we got to the moon. Whoa. And anybody who got us to the moon, well, I guess I have to put that whole group of people up there. I mean, if you don't have a hero, if you don't going to call that a heroic thing, get in a little tiny tin can capsule and get to the moon, man, in the 60s, I'll go hero on that one.
That makes me think of, so we're a little bit, an hour or two north of Charleston, and down there they had, and I forget the name of it, God forgive me, but it was like the first submarine that actually, you know, during the Civil War. And these,
is that the Monitor and the Merrimack? I'm going to say it was one of them.
Maybe, you know, and I should know, but I don't. I'm sorry.
Well, everybody will Google it now who's watching.
Yeah, well, go Google. But you know, like the first few, they went down and they died. You know,
Yeah.
like which could have happened with the astronauts who went. So you really do have to.
Well, I mean, that I didn't intend for this to be the segue, but that kind of does bring me to my segue of what project, which we're probably going to go towards, which is this book I just wrote, which I got into because I was pursuing a heroic story. And I'd done tons of these, you know, smaller stories, local stories, and I wanted to do a little bit bigger national story. Again, probably strategically, partly to get the work out in a bigger stage. I was starting to see what may or may not, you know, resonate. So I went after this astronaut story from the 60s, except it was a group of women who tried to become astronauts, but because of the sexism and the nature of the world back then, they weren't able to become astronauts. And so their crusade began to be, you know, trying to fight for those rights to become, you know, to be able to be an astronaut or to just change the system. And so that was a film that I was pursuing when I.
What would it have been called? Do you know?
Oh yeah, I'm going to soon tweet my original for that movie. It was going to be called Almost Mercury because see, it was the Mercury men's program where the men were Mercury was the one where the 7 men, eat one at a time, was going to, you know, go for the orbit. John Glenn had the first orbit, the first launch for an American. All those things, Shepard, Glenn, and then the 7 men that were in the Mercury program. But there were 13 women, sometimes called, more casually, but called the Mercury 13. And those ladies were really good pilots. They were athletic. They were really, you know, smart and well-trained. They didn't have military experience because us gals couldn't do that back then. So they wanted to become, they got into a testing program, which was kind of sort of put on by NASA a little bit on the side. They didn't want to own it, but it was their guys doing the testing to see if women could qualify physically and in other ways, going through some of the tests. Could these women pilots hold up? And the first round of tests was done, and one woman passed right away. She passed with flying colors, even acing out some of the guys' scores. And all of a sudden, it was like, whoa, what about her? And then some other ladies followed. Well, 13 of them passed the tests. And then the one who passed first was the woman I wound up knowing, title of my book, A Woman I Know. She wound up passing and fighting and taking it to Congress, taking it to the White House, trying to get her rights, and she failed. So she did not win that, but I felt totally that was a heroic story that I wanted to tell about what she did because so few Americans know that story. It's just a freaking amazing story.
Right. So just that story alone,
right,
is amazing. But then,
right,
it grew.
It changed.
It's just like it totally changed. So you made like a hard left.
I did.
What was it that changed that hard, you know, made you take
so
that?
I'll halt right here and say that the book is sort of written in telling that story, right? And of course, I'm going to tell it better in the book than I'll ever tell it on a quick story like this. But so the book is written in that way of like, here's what happened to me. I was going to tell this story in a film, and here's what happened. And basically, I ran into a very brief fleeting acquaintanceship with a woman that I briefly ran into who worked for the government in the Defense Department, and she worked in espionage. Didn't give me too many details about that, but the bottom line was after a while of briefly knowing her, I came to the conclusion she was dropping little warnings to me about my film project. How could that be? That's so weird. And I just thought maybe it's my imagination or maybe not, but she seems to be warning me that there's problems with my film. And maybe that's why she got to know me briefly, and I better look and see if my film does have a problem, because I feel like I'm being told something. So I did. I simply started to look into whether the woman that I knew had any intelligence ties, because come on, if you're in NASA and you're in a secret program and she's visiting top secret facilities all the time. I had pictures of her at Los Alamos. That's the Manhattan Project, the bomb. I had pictures of her a lot of places, and I was like looking at that, going, well, wait a minute. She could be in a secret program, right? And this women's astronaut testing was top secret, right? So I simply Googled her name with the word CIA, like as we do Google, right? And Dr. Google came up with, oh my God, this other lady who had a similar name. But I knew my subject's biography, chapter and verse. I mean, you can imagine I was interviewing her. I'd been working with her for years. So I got this whole nother dossier on this woman who was a spy and whose entire life and her operations are detailed in the JFK assassination records, right? 10,000 documents about this other lady. And I quickly, in one afternoon, looked at the other lady's life. And I was like, whoa, this other gal is looking like, how can these two not be the same person?
Like all parallel.
Oh, they were parallel, like shadowing, to the point of, back in the 50s, how many women went to South America? Be a 20-year-old, I'll use the word girl, we don't use that today, but back then, a 20-year-old gal going to South America on her own to the Amazon jungle, where people were pretty ignorant about what the jungle was like. White people hadn't been in there much at all. There were lots of indigenous tribes, and there were articles coming out in films about, cannibalistic headhunters. There were some reasons for these. They were wild stories, right? But there were some.
I remember the National Geographic things, the magazines my parents prescribed to.
Now, okay, the listeners might not remember the 50s. I wasn't even born in the 50s, just after, but I grew up in the 60s, and it was pretty serious then. Nobody's going to let their college-age daughter go alone into that jungle where there is nobody. Back in the 1950, like, okay, this is just societally not done, let alone two girls that came from the same small town in Oklahoma that had exact same descriptions, that were both in aviation, that were both, the list went on, what I call the astonishing similarities between the two women. And in the book, I enumerate these, which are, I think, it's right there, just shocking. And when you come out of that, you go, whoa, there's a connection. What is it? Are they the exact same lady? So I went on a really intensive investigation quickly, as quick as I could, to find out, like, well, are they the same person? Keep in mind, I'm still now working with the astronaut lady. She's older, to tell her story. I'm interviewing her directly. I contact her and say, we have to talk. I have some investors, not crazy money, not huge money, but we have a little seed investment going, and I chipped in for that. So we have a little bit of money at play to make the story happen. So this is a serious business venture, and I need to know if she is like on the up and up. Who is this other lady? You can just imagine how floored I was. Okay, you can imagine my world. Oh, and I have people in New York I'm working with. I have to phone them and say, guys, there could be something wrong with our story we're working on. Like, I don't know if this lady is this other spy. You can imagine people looking at me cross-eyed, like, Mary.
Wasn't
and
it
I will
like
say,
a 10-year endeavor?
I'd only worked with her
a book or a movie about this one thing, and then you're your publishers or whoever on notice, and they're like, wait, what?
So the good news is I did a lot of the legwork with the original story. When films start out, you're doing something, you're on your own steam at first. Like when you get a film idea, you go to the person, you're doing it. Then you get a couple of maybe investors if you need to. You get a lawyer, maybe you get the rights. I had the rights of this woman's story. We paid for them. So I had all that done. So there was a certain amount of people, and I had some producers in New York interested in, we were working together. I had a casting director, we were talking to actresses. So it's pretty far along, but it's a small team. Nonetheless, I had to talk to my team and sound a little semi-crazy, or not crazy, but you're worried. And I will say, everybody, I have a pretty legit reputation both in Lancaster and what I've done. So I'm thankful that people pretty much were like, wow, Mary, that's amazing. And I didn't have too many people, or really anybody in my immediate circle, disbelieve me, thankfully, that I said, look, I'm finding this and she's very parallel to this other lady and we have a problem with our story. People believe me and then I pointed them to the facts, which also quickly makes people believe you, right? You always hope. So there was that. So then we did put the brakes on the film. I put the brakes on the film because some people said, well, Mary, all the stories in the papers and it's been written up, so can't we just do it anyway? It's a really good story. And I'm like, well, no, I don't think it's fully the truth. And something's wrong with it. We can't keep going and get more investors and get more artists involved and actresses. And all of a sudden there's a faulty foundation to your story. So I pulled the plug on it myself before the contracts were up and everything. That was hard because I thought that story was my calling. I felt very devoted, like I needed to do that story. And now I had to go, over to, the JFK assassination. That was not even my genre. I like films that are cool about pioneering women. And this was not, me, I was not, that's not my genre. And I knew very little about it, except what the average American knows, which is frankly very little.
Right. Wow. So the book's not even out yet.
Nope, it's coming out, and from what we're doing, look at my calendar, less than 2 weeks from our interviews, coming out like 10 days.
That's incredible.
And there's some blockbusters in it. I don't mean to tout that, but there legit are blockbusters in this book.
And so it's already highly acclaimed. Like Barnes and Noble is it's like the top read of 2023, and
yeah,
you must like how are you like pinching yourself for because you're still at home and you're still in Lancaster, and like do you walk down the street, do you know who I am?
No, I do not.
You know who you're talking to?
Nope, because I'm pretty smart enough to know that there's going to be a lot of different opinions about my book. And I don't think it'll be universally applauded. I think anytime you come forward with either new information that might challenge what they call legacy narratives, stories that have been told, you're going to challenge that. Maybe other people are either invested in it. I'm new to it. Who do I think I am coming out with this? I think I'm going to take some blowback. I think I'm taking a little bit of applause already from Barnes and Noble. I mean, that was huge. I will say that one hit me. I mean, I'd never written a book before, and they listed it as one of the top 10 books of 2023 in literary nonfiction, meaning, tells a good story. Right. So I was thrilled and honored. But I know, and I'm prepared that, we'll probably get some bumpy reviews too, Becky, because I know that everybody tells me that, I mean, conspiracies have a really bad name to them right now. My book does take a conspiratorial tack and says, the discoveries that I got pointed to more to the Kennedy assassination story than I ever dreamt might be there. It was not as simple as the Warren Commission claimed, in my view, and from the work that I've done. And so to come out with, even today, I think, and there's so many wacky conspiracy theories that if there's a legit concern, I think it gets shelved over into the, crazy pile. And maybe that's been done intentionally. I mean, people argue about that, but not all stories like that are created equal, right? There's a very wide range of those things. So I do think that I'll, probably come under some attack from some quarters, and I think I'll have my supporters. And I think so far, a lot of publishers and industry people have read it, and people seem to think it's a really good read, that it does present really interesting new discoveries. And I come to some conclusions, but readers might come from, different conclusions. But I think there's a lot that's worthwhile there, and that I will stand by. But no, I don't expect it to be universally loved. I don't think you do a book on a topic like this and have it just be universally loved. I think I'm just hoping it finds its people and it finds its airspace.
So this was more, you trip across this, the parallels and this woman that
Yep.
you know, and you make the left turn, and so this is truly like a calling. Did you feel like you were
Was.
being led and just totally motivated? Because didn't you at one point go to Cuba?
I did.
You know,
Yeah, I've
you've
traveled the
done,
world for this book. I've traveled more than I ever have all over the world with the older lady because I confronted her about being the double identity in the early part of the book. I
she
confronted her,
went
said,
with
"Hey,
you too?
what's that?"
She went with you?
She did, because here's what happened. I confronted her. This is chapter 1. I confront her about being the other lady. I'm like, well, look at this, like, explain it. And this is my favorite part of the book. I mean, I confront her and you hear what she said and you can see if you think it was a very good answer. So she gives me this answer and I'm like, okay. So from that point on, now, let me ask you this. If somebody accused you or pretty much accused you of having a double identity, right? And clearly you don't have one. I'm your relative. I can vouch for you.
Right.
Would you really want to befriend them and take them all over the world after they did that? Like, or
Yeah,
would you maybe think you want to get away from them if they're wrong, right?
right,
No.
right.
This lady, after I confronted her about having a double identity, and she technically denied it, as you'll see in the book, but then told me a lot of stuff that clearly linked her to the other lady. Then she wanted to get to know me and become my friend. Up to that point, I've only been interviewing her as a very formal process.
Mm-hmm.
Now things change when I confront her about having the double identity. And that ensues 10 years of getting to know her for real, where he, drops me hints and breadcrumbs about who she really is. And that's the 10-year process. Meanwhile, I go down to the National Archives and I start researching the other spy lady, what she did and why is she in the Kennedy assassination documents. And ultimately, that's the question, is the other lady that's written about in the CIA documents, is she a good guy or is she a bad guy? And that was a very tough question that I had to ask. That's chapter 4.
I just keep coming back because the whole.
But yes, it's a calling. Yes, it's a calling. That was yeah.
It's literary nonfiction. And
Right.
it's funny because
This happened.
like this is what we got. You're like,
right.
You didn't make this story up, and it sounds incredible. And that
it does.
and that's where the calling is, because you're like,
well, okay, so I totally hear you. I felt it was a calling, and I do not speak lightly in those terms. I feel you have to use that term cautiously. Mm-hmm. I don't think you want to throw out, people throw things around and that's great for whoever does it. But for me to say the word calling, it better be serious. It better be something deeply felt. And yes, I did feel that because, my entire team was saying, Mary, you've just gotten to the point where you can get an Oscar-winning actress. Like, why turn away to a book that's going to take you, that might not even be able to ever get published? Because we weren't sure the wacky story would come to fruition. So
the real wacky story, though, it's a real one.
It is. Well, that's why the book has 1,600 footnotes. We decided it has 100 pages of footnotes because we wanted to document, like people would say, well, could this have happened? Well, I document everything. The documents where the other lady is it is just heavily, heavily fortified with facts so that it doesn't wind up just being Mary is saying this, where I can show you the articles that show these astonishing similarities between the women, so that that's laid out for the reader. And for anybody who wants to go in and recreate what I did, they can. So that was important to me. That's why it couldn't be a film. I felt right away. And that was the calling aspect where I'm like, I have to turn my back on my career to pursue this.
And you really did, right?
Yeah.
Like, really, you stopped.
Pretty much.
This film, that was going to be the next film about the woman you know.
Yep.
But then, so 10 years ago, it all stopped for this book. So you kind of went underground.
In my prime of my career, with my ability to get good actresses and everything else, I pivoted. I did do a documentary in that time, the horse carriage documentary. And I'm proud that I continued my work, but it's very clear that I did not continue my film work in the way that I would have if I weren't doing this. Like, I would say at least it wasn't even part-time. It was like almost full-time for those 10 years. I did it a lot. I did some other work, but I was really focused on this. It took that long to get this together.
So how did this impact your personal life, like you
Yeah.
got a lovely
Yeah.
partner,
Well,
Michelle, and
yeah,
you're traveling around. Were you like mental and like all pulling your hair out like we
there
see
was a moment,
or like
and
crazy?
I don't put too much about this in the book, but I do put it in the acknowledgments. But not my film team was arguing to keep going with the film because they all were vested in it. They loved it, the original astronaut story, because there were other women tested and the whole thing was true to a point. But yeah, my partner didn't like the, everybody was at one point, I felt like every single person in the world but me was lobbying to drop it, right? Because, and also saying the Kennedy assassination is a hot potato, nothing, the case can never be solved. I remember a JFK author telling me the case will never know, the case can never be solved. And I remember saying to him, so like a doctor is going to try to solve, a doctor who's studying cancer is going to say cancer can never be cured. Like, who's going to say that? Don't go into any field if that's what you're going to say. Like, you can't solve it. No, there's a lot of information. We can certainly move the football down the field towards a better solution. If there's questions, let's try to answer them. Let's not give up before we even start the game. So I never came in with that attitude. So yeah, it was hard personally when I felt like everybody doubted as I got further into the research, like, Mary, what are you going to do with this? Can this become a film? Probably not a film. You've never written a book. What are you thinking? And then it dragged on and took a while. So it was, but I think when you really push for something, this from what you've done with your autism network, when you become the driving force, there's this point at which when you're pushing for something, your freight train is moving, and then all of a sudden people hop on board your train, right? You're the engine pushing it down, and all of a sudden you get a nice bunch of passengers, and not just passengers, but people helping you.
Yeah.
That's amazing that happens. But it takes a little while and a lot of work before that. But that eventually did come around. But it was not an easy period at all.
So I think about you, all the research and you amassing all this stuff, and you're talking about 100 pages of footnotes and all this stuff. So like, I'm kind of in the weeds now of how you take all that and do something you've never done before and write a book. Like how did you organize it? Like gee willikers, like I know you have been researching, but like how long did it take you to actually
write it? Yeah, well, because it wasn't an easy thing to write. I mean, and it was over the pandemic. There's another one of those silver linings. So I already started it a little bit before the pandemic, the writing. I might have gotten a draft out of my head. But then the pandemic hit. And so two things come to my mind. One is how many people have done a lot of work on the Kennedy assassination, whether they were on the maybe wacky side of thinking or some solid evidence or whatever, but there's a lot written out there. So when I would get a brand new clue, which I was given several that were never heard of before, I could read very quickly in Google and other books and see where my piece of the puzzle that I just found fit into all this wonderful work done by other people. So that expedited me being able to theorize, like, what did that mean when I found that, so that was helpful. So that was one part of the answer, and I'm not trying to think where we were on that. I'm having a senior moment there, but
I'm with you. So it's all like how you actually
how I put together in the writing. 4 years. Yeah, it was. So then it was 4 years of actually writing it, and the pandemic hit. And actually the pandemic was very, I hate to say it, selfishly helpful for me, because then I could kind of legit, because meanwhile I was trying to pay bills by doing some film work, and I had obviously had a life that I had to keep going those 10 years. I could not drop everything. I did a documentary, I did a number of commercials and other things, but the pandemic allowed me to say, no, I can't do it anymore, and now I'm going to finish the book, right? So that wound up, and I literally took money from savings, which I don't normally do, to pay bills, which I really, really don't do, but I said, if there's a time in your life with the pandemic and this book, it's all telling me to just take time to do the book and just finish it. So it helped me.
I can't. Now, did you have help? So when people are writing a book, would that be somebody considered an editor or like somebody on your team who helped to coach you? through the process?
So learning to write is so cool, and I'm sure people are aware. I mean, there's so many great video tutorials out there. When I was learning to writing skills, and I was like, gee, here I am in the pandemic alone. I signed up for those master classes that you
Yeah.
see, and I was like, I watched the great writers and listened to them, and that helped me a lot. Isn't it great we have that stuff at our fingertips now, right? What a blessing. And then but once I got through, and I thought, I'm going to take this as far as I can take it. Of course, I had help from, my partner. I had a number of people help me along the way for sure. And they're all kind of acknowledged in the book in the process. But a lot of it was solo, a lot of it was me sitting there working hard. And then, I got a literary agent about a year ago or a year and a half ago. And he's been incredible. And he got it out to the publisher. And then I got an editor. And this last year, we edited it with a real legit top flight editor who's wonderful, believed in the book. And I will say this, Becky, I've been around in entertainment for a while, and you hear people say this on TV and stuff, but I've never had a team around me like this group of people helping me with the book. In the end, talk about callings and things that are meant to be. All of a sudden, I've had good people I've worked with, the Oscar-winning actress and all, but have everybody from start to finish be this strong and this committed. That I don't think I've ever seen like this. And they've really helped me get it to this point. I just got the books in literally a couple days ago.
My gosh. I can't wait to be at the book signing.
Yeah, I can't wait to see you there, by the way.
The release party up there in Lancaster.
Yeah, so I mean, to have a finished book in your hand with the 100 footnotes, there they are.
You sleep with it, you love it and hold it and walk around and
yeah, I'm a little scared of it. I walk by it and I look at it from afar. It's just something you almost can't believe. It's a little much to have in a small potent package. So no, I do not cozy up to it. I sit it out so I can walk by it and go, it actually is there. Yeah,
it's kind of crazy. Okay, so then part of the book thing is then the cover jacket, right?
Yes.
Sometimes I look at book covers and I'm like, what? Like, so how was that painful or?
No, I worried about that. What worried me is I worried that, so you can see it has a picture of the woman I know. We haven't even named her yet. Maybe I'll keep it mysterious for the review, but there she is. And, the publisher, there's a different picture in France. The book's coming out in Australia and France, but this is the American cover. And I submitted, like the publisher asked me for some photo ideas, which ones did I like? And I'm so glad they did that, because the one thing I would have had pitched a fit about if it was the wrong picture on the book. At that, I would have put my foot down. I wasn't a diva about
you're a picture girl, you're just like,
wrong picture would not be good. But luckily they asked me. So now they're working with the ones I submitted. And they came up with 2 designs, but we kind of all agreed, boom, this was the one. And the designer, I believe his name's Christopher Brand. I mean, just amazing, does a lot of top drawer book covers. And I didn't change a thing. Like, it came across, do you like this? Any suggestions? Look perfect. Let's go with it. So yeah, I think it's just right, because, one of the things it does is it takes the woman I know, but she's piloting her plane right there and she's smoking, right? You can probably see.
I see her smoking. I didn't know. It looks like she's driving. I didn't know that she was piloting.
She's actually piloting a plane. So cool. She's piloting her plane and smoking, right? And what's really cool about it is, she's supposed to be so squeaky clean, and health conscious and beat the men in these physical tasks.
All right.
The cigarette is just one of your little hints, because she's not normally seen. A little glimpse there of her flying along and smoking, and the picture might not be as it seemed. And that was one of the reasons I picked that picture.
Very nice. So now you said it's Australia, France, United States, and then
UK,
you're starting UK, and then that's incredible. I mean, honestly,
I know.
And now you're going to record the audiobook.
We just did record it, and I mean, that opened a whole new world to me too. How about it? They're very hot items these days.
Yeah, so that's exciting. So wow.
Yep, that's exciting, and that'll be out there.
And then, but you're also, now that I guess this is done, and you don't really, when the book is released November 14th, you're really not quite sure I assume you're going to be on some sort of crazy trajectory, like, books, like, because I know that you're talking about you're working on another documentary about Lancaster, correct?
Well, and that's a very much of a side project that is not super formalized. But yeah, when the pandemic hit and, writing the book, I didn't want to let go completely of my film career. Everything happened during the pandemic itself, but also the political drifts that were happening even within families. Fortunately, our family has not been subjected to heavy rifts, at least not that I know of. Maybe it is, but we've all stuck together quite well. But in our Pennsylvania area here, we've had, families torn apart, from the political divides in our country.
Yeah.
And Pennsylvania, and right here in Lancaster, where I am specifically, is a bit of a microcosm. So I started to film some of that. We filmed a young lady who was running for in her 20s, running for office, and she was very progressive on the Bernie Sanders side of things, and her family was in the Trump side of things. And we filmed with her, and it was access to her family, and they were amazing in the way they were navigating that, actually. But it was tough. So we started to film what was like right in front of everybody, and we couldn't miss the divides about the pandemic. We couldn't miss the divides about everything that's happened, right? So I started to turn my camera on that. That project is in process, and that'll probably happen after, I'll finish it after the book, right? I had to get the book done first.
I feel like that's going to be backburnered for a while.
But I think as soon as this, I don't know, there's a big question. You think I'll be real busy? I hope I'll be real busy. I'm not sure about a book, I'm used to films where you're carrying equipment and doing something. So part of me's itching to get back to a little bit of that. But I think for a couple months anyway, I think I'll be focused on doing some interviews for the book and making sure I back up what I've said in the book. As I know it'll be controversial. I'll have to answer some critics. I'm ready to do that. And so that's my rest of 2023, but 2024, whole new year.
Well, yeah, certainly we can hope for that. So I have just a couple more questions.
Yep.
So if you were to be a superhero, who would you be?
Well, if you really could knight yourself any one of them, I've always liked Superman. I hate to say he's such a standard one, but Superman can do it all. He says there's that kryptonite problem, but other than that,
well, everybody's got it, right? Mine's chicken wings.
Guy can pretty much, turn the world backwards if he needs to rotate time and everything. So I don't know how you could possibly not go with him.
What I picked was Underdog. I had contributed.
Oh, I liked him.
To a book called Superheroes on the Spectrum, a chapter, and they asked who your superhero was, and mine would be Underdog, because all of our peeps with autism and their families, we're all about that.
I love that show too, by the way. That Underdog show was great.
Now we're really aging ourselves. We have to stop.
Yeah, we are.
And we're not as old as we are, okay?
We never saw that show.
No, I've just seen pictures, it's all good stuff.
Absolutely.
So when we launch this, are the films that you have made, are they streaming somewhere? Where can the audience find them? Or tell us a little bit about how people can learn more about you and your work.
Well, thank you. Easily by Googling on the book front, that's going to be pretty much everywhere. It's going to be at Targets, Barnes and Noble, Walmart's even, Amazon. They can get that. It's called A Woman I Know, Mary Haverstick. That's easy. The films are a little trickier because they were indie, but I did Home. That jumps around. It used to be on Hulu. I think it's on Peacock now, over in the Peacock network. So that's where that one can be streamed. Most of them are also on Amazon Prime. I have one on there, The Horse Carriages of the Last Horsemen of New York, which was about another interesting little odd political fight about the horse carriages in Manhattan. So that was something I did while I was doing the book. Real proud of that. Liam Neeson's in that. And that's a great little documentary that people can check out on Amazon Prime. So those are things I've done, all of which I'm proud of, but I think the book's going to take center stage. And Audible will have the audio book, which I actually do narrate.
So how long did it take you to narrate that?
A week. It was a full week of, and that's rough. That's a rough one because, unlike we're sitting here, we can move around.
Yeah.
But when you're recording, you're really in jail. You can't move and your clothing's making noise, so and I found my back and everything like, whoa, 6-7 hours a day of five days it was.
And they were like, wait, can we do that again? You know, and I just do it on a limited for our online training modules. Another positive to COVID was, you know, all of our training that we did for our, you know, hospitality workers and everybody, you know, was always live and on site. And then COVID happened.
No.
And then so we made the pivot, right? And we took all the IP and we made online modules now, and now everybody knows how to learn virtually. So, but like my voiceovers or, you know, reading the scripts and everything is tiny compared to a book. I can't even imagine what you went through. And like, I'm just like, you know, if I flub up something here and there, it's not a big deal. But like for you, you're on Audible and worldwide and
well, you do, you know, you don't get a lot of takes. I mean, you pretty much read it until you make a mistake and there's a director in your earphone that'll say you biffed that word or your, you know, the plural wasn't clear, say that you sound like it, so say it again. So you know, but you stop and start. That's why it takes a week when the book will probably be 12 hours of reading, but it took 40 hours to get that done. So yeah. But you know, here's an interesting one coming up. Do I do books or films? I'm going to have to like have a little bit of a thought going forward. Like, do I do another one? Where do I head from here?
You know, I think what you have to do is do what you've done. And maybe specifically with this book project is heed the call, right?
That's right.
And that's all we do every day, right? Is wake up and heed the call and do the best.
And have your ears attuned to it. That was the key, you know, like I think
It's a whisper. It's a whisper. You don't want to listen to it. You're like, no.
Or a gut feeling.
Yeah.
Too.
Like, yeah, no, I don't want to listen. But you know, generally you don't have a choice. You know, you find out that it's something that you have to do. And I'm so proud of you and I'm so happy for you and your greatest success. And I cannot wait to get my hands on that book.
Well, how about you and what you've done? I mean, you're getting the Autism Network together has been a real incredible journey for you. So, you know, yeah, you have to feature yourself on your own podcast if you haven't already. We'll have to turn the tables for you.
Well, you'll just make a documentary and it'll be great. It'll be all about
we'll
yes, you can. That's what we'll do. So, Mary Haverstick, accomplished filmmaker and now author, worldwide known, highly acclaimed before it even comes out. Congratulations and thank you so much for this time with you. And we'll make sure to publish the links in your bio to the different films. We'll try, you know, so people have access to everything. And if anybody needs anything, feel free to contact us. And we're signing off here from Large Impact.
Love it. Thank you, cuz.